Hello, I am April Wilhoit, the Agricultural and Natural Resource Agent from Fleming County. Today we're going to be discussing hay sampling. It's important to test hay because we want to know what the nutritional value is of it so that we are feeding our livestock exactly what they need. The nutrition is based upon the hay sample that you send from your lot of hay into one of the forage laboratories. And from that information, you'll have all the knowledge you need to be able to make a balanced ration for your livestock. Or if you're selling your hay, you'll be able to market your hay based upon the results that you receive from your hay analysis as well. The first step in taking a hay sample is actually determining what type of probe you want to use. And again, this is just something that's going to be a personal preference. It's not anything that you have to do what your neighbor is doing. It's just whatever you want to do. Today you'll see here we have a couple of drill-driven options. This is a drill-driven probe that has a canister that will collect the sample inside the canister. And this one is a drill-driven one that actually has a Ziploc bag on it that you can collect the sample as you're taking it directly into the bag. Again, it's a personal preference. It doesn't matter. The things you do have to pay attention to when you look for a drill is that the probe, the diameter of it is at least 3/8 inches in diameter. You don't want anything less than that because then it can become selective whenever you're drilling into the hay and push some of the hay particles to the side that you actually want to be a part of your sample. You also want to make sure that the length of the probe is actually going to be able to penetrate at least 14 inches into the bale. So we're looking at something more like 15 to 18 inches long is where you're kind of shooting for. So you don't want anything less than 15 to 18 inches long. If you don't like something that uses a drill, there's other options that are manual that you can check into as well. You can Google these information or you can check with your local extension office. Once you selected your probe, the next step is to determining where you're going to sample your hay. So when you're trying to determine, you want to make sure that you're finding a lot of hay. And when we say a lot, I'm not meaning a whole bunch. You're wanting to find the lot, which is the same field, the same cutting, the same species, varieties of grasses. So you don't want to have your first cutting alfalfa that came from one field mixed with your first cutting cool season grass mixture from another field. Those are two separate lots. So you want to make sure that you're sampling each lot separately. And you don't want to go over 200 tons because then you're not getting a true representative sample whenever you're taking a hay sample. So what you want to do is select your lot, and then if you, let's say you have 200 bales from that lot, then you want to be able to take samples from 20 different bales. So you'll have 20 different cores, one core from every bale. You just don't want to go down the whole line of bales though and just take one sample after another. You want to be able to get a little rhyme or reasoning with it because you don't want to be selective. You don't want to just look at a good bale and be like, hey, I'm going to take a sample from that one and not one that looks maybe not as well. You want to be able to get a true representation. That way you know exactly what your nutritional value is of your entire lot. So a good idea is to, if you have 200 bales, divide that by 20 and then take a sample out of every 10th bale. So that gives you a good idea of what you want to do. After you have identified which hay lot you're going to sample first, you want to look at what type of bales you have. You know, here in Kentucky we have many different options. We have farmers who do round bales, we have folks that do small square bales, and then the large square bales as well, or rectangular bales. It's up to you on, you know, whatever your preference is on your size of the bales. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all whenever you're taking a sample. You just want to make sure that you're sampling from the correct spot on each of the bales. So from a round bale, you want to do it from the side. And so when we say the side, you want to make sure you're doing it from where it's wrapped. If you go into the end of it, then more than likely you're going to be going into the same windrow, and that's not going to get a true representation of that hay bale and what the nutritional value is from it. So that's the reason why we want to go in from the side. So when looking at square bales or rectangular bales, you're going to be going in at the end. Again, it's going to be on the end that has some of the string on it you'll be able to see. So you don't want to be going into the same windrow by going into the side of it. So that's where you sample from. And then we'll talk a little bit more here in a minute about how to actually use the probe. Whenever I go out to take a hay sample, I want to make sure I have all the supplies I need. So we've already talked about our drill and our probe. We want to make sure we have those two items definitely, because we want to be able to take our sample. But we also want to go ahead and have a plastic container, a zip tight one, that we can put our sample down into and close once we've got our 20 cores. We also need a Sharpie or some other writing instrument to be able to put the information on the outside of our bag. We want to be able to put our farm name, the cutting, the date we sampled, any other identifiable information that is going to be helpful for us in knowing which hay sample it is when we get our results back, as well as to be able to keep good records. So we can also add information on here about first cutting, second cutting, anything that's very identifiable to be able to help us as farmers to keep good records and to make sure that we're keeping things straight whenever it comes to nutritional value of our hay. Now that we've got all of our supplies, we're ready to take a sample. Just remember, we want to take the sample from the side and not the front. Now that we're ready to take a sample, we want to kind of figure out where on the bell do we want to actually use our probe. So looking at the bell, you kind of just want to use the center of it. So you want to center it from the top to the bottom and from left to right. Make sure that you hold your drill horizontally, because that's going to make sure that we get a good representative sample. Now that we've taken our sample, you can see that it's collected inside the actual probe. To be able to get it down in the canister, we want to use a plunger. Plunger usually comes with the probe whenever you order them. Or if you've broken one or anything, you can always check with the manufacturer about ordering a sample. So all you have to do is plunge it down in there. So you've collected one hay sample already. Now that we've got our 20 sample cores, pour it down into our labeled, you all would label this, Ziploc bag. Zip it up, and then it'll be ready to ship. When determining when to sample your hay, you have to decide which way you're going to have them stored. Is it going to be outside, or are you going to have it in a barn or a hoop barn or some kind of tarped enclosure? It's going to really determine what you decide on how you're going to store when you want to sample your hay. So when looking at outside hay, you want to at least sample it 3 to 4 weeks prior to feeding. You don't really want to do it any earlier than that, because nutrients can change with the heating, the cooling of bales, and so you want to actually wait closer to feeding that you can. So look at like 3 to 4 weeks. For any hay that's stored inside of a barn, you can sample earlier, because it's going to have the biggest changes for it the first 3 to 4 weeks that it's being stored. So you don't want to do it any earlier than 3 to 4 weeks after cutting, but anytime after that is okay for stored hay. Just remember, if you're outside storing hay, make sure you sample it closer to feeding. If it's stored in a barn, just make sure you do it 3 to 4 weeks after it's harvested. So pretty much what we've talked about so far, we've been just looking at dry hay, but we also have folks that do haylage or baleage, or however you want to say it. It's your more wet hay. That you want to sample the exact same way we've been talking about with the dry hay, but you need to also take precautions on when you are leaving the hay once you've already pierced a hole into the plastic and taken your sample. UV resistant tape needs to be used to cover that hole, so make sure that you're not changing any of that good stuff that's happening with the processes that the microbes are doing within that hay bale. So that's one of the most important things we want to remind people, is to make sure that you go ahead and have some UV resistant tape with you whenever you go out to sample your haylage or baleage, and that way you can make sure that that is secure. The only thing different we really tell people is, with even dry hay, you want to try to get it to the labs as quickly as possible. With baleage or haylage, that is even more important. If you take it immediately, send it that day, or make sure you go ahead and put it in the refrigerator or the freezer if it's going to be a day or two, because that's going to be important. And we always encourage folks to actually not send hay out, especially haylage or baleage, at the end of the week, because you really don't want to be sitting at a UPS office or something like that over the weekend. So make sure that you're trying to ship haylage and baleage at the beginning of the week, or even your hay is usually a better idea. I hope all this information I've provided you today will help you in sampling your hay, whether it's your first time or if you've done it numerous times before. We hope this provided some good insight on the reasons why it is important to sample your hay, and also to help you actually know how to use a hay probe and to send in your samples correctly to a forage lab. You can select any forage lab, but some of them are certified, so make sure that you're selecting the best one for you. There's different options that our extension offices use. There's the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, there's Dairy One, and there's many, many other options. So check with your local cooperative extension service and they can provide you more information.